Hope City. How are we this morning? Everybody doing good? You guys good? It's good to see you. Yeah, we're already clapping. Man, this is going to be a good morning together. Here we go. All right. Hey, if we've not met, my name's Adam, and I'm our lead pastor here. Love to get to know you after the gathering, so stop by in the back, say hey to me. But man, I'm really excited about this series that we're kicking off this morning called Red Point. And some of you are like, what the heck does that even mean? Any rock climbers in here? I know we got a few rock climbers around Hope City. Yeah, so you guys may have heard this term before. As far as rock climbing goes for me, I took a rock climbing class in college. I actually have college credit in rock climbing, believe it or not. I also took about 12 other PE classes during that same 2-year stretch because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. But I just got to say this, rock climbers, I've got crazy respect for you because climbing is one of the most physically demanding sports I think that I've ever done. I mean, think about it. You're climbing a rock face or like a cliff or a mountain or just a wall in a gym, and you're hanging on with nothing but your fingertips and your toenails, right? It's freaking crazy what you all do. And I'm just going to be honest, I don't trust my fingertips or my toenails to keep me alive hanging off of a mountain, but you all do it all the time. You guys are kind of crazy, and I stinking love it. But this term red point, to kind of define it for us and let us know what we're talking about, it comes from a climbing term. It means successfully completing a climb from the ground up or from the start of a specific pitch or section of that climb without falling or resting on your rope. And it's done free climbing, or you may have heard this term if you climbed around a gym, sport climbing. It's not with a rope hanging down from the top, but it's starting from the bottom with the rope attached to you, and then you create anchor points along the way. And if you fall off the wall, you fall to your highest anchor point before your rope catches you. And to red point a climb means that it's typically one of the hardest climbs, one of the toughest sections that you as a climber have ever climbed, and it pushes the climber to the edge of their ability. But a red point climb, here's the key. It's not attempted until it's been extensively studied and practiced, meaning this, that the climber's not unfamiliar with the route that they're getting ready to climb. In other words, a red point climb is this. It's what was just up on the screen. It's pushing to the limits of one's ability based on remembering where you've been before. A red point climb is pushing to the limits of one's ability based on remembering where you've been before. And this is best depicted through a documentary titled The Dawn Wall. Has anybody ever seen The Dawn Wall? You should go look it up. It is amazing. There's this climber named Tommy Caldwell who's widely recognized as one of the best, if not the best climber in the world. And his buddy, Kevin Jorgensen, they successfully completed a red point climb of the Dawn Wall. It's a section of El Capitan in Yosemite. In fact, this picture of that line going up this rock, this is El Capitan, that's the Dawn Wall, and that's the route that Caldwell and Jorgensen took up the Dawn Wall. And while El Capitan, you may have heard of it before, it's like a mecca for climbing in the United States. Lots of people have climbed there. This section of the wall, the Dawn Wall, was previously considered impossible to climb until Caldwell and Jorgensen went out and they studied the route. And they attempted different sections of the climb. And every time, years and years and years of studying and practicing, they were starting to form a foundation. That finally led to a day or several days where they climbed and completed this red point climb back in 2015. But along the way, what you need to know is this. Every route that they studied, every attempt and failure along the way, every hardship that they faced, it actually formed the foundation for the day that they would actually complete the climb. They got to remember where they had been so that they knew what to do next when they were actually in it. And while for me, this is a far cry from red pointing a climb on El Capitan, I was in a spin class the other day, all right? Anybody do spin classes or anything like that? Any cyclists? And our instructor in our spin class, she said the best thing. She reminded the class when we were getting to the hardest section of the workout. You know, the one where you just want to quit or throw up or both, you know? She goes, the work you put in today will form the foundation that you'll stand on tomorrow. The work you put in today will form the foundation you'll stand on tomorrow. And she goes, so make this moment count. And I was like, okay. And I just started writing harder. And that's what I want to talk about today. What moments are you making count today that will form the foundation that you'll stand on tomorrow? What moments are you making count today that will form the foundation that you'll stand on tomorrow? We all have these foundational moments in life, right? Like the moment you got married or the moment you got divorced. When you had kids or when your kids finally grew up and they're out of the house and you're an empty nester now, thank God, right? You have this moment when you graduated or when you dropped out, when you got the job or when you got fired, When you placed your faith in Jesus for the first time, that's a moment. That's a foundational moment. Another foundational moment might be when you decided you didn't believe it at all anymore, and so you left the church. Or maybe a foundational moment, maybe some of you are experiencing it like even here today, maybe it's the moment you decide to come back to church and dig back in and see if this Jesus stuff is true. Maybe it was the moment you realized you were addicted, and then the moment you got clean. Or maybe it's the moment you relapsed. Maybe your foundational moment, it's when you got the diagnosis, or when you got the good news medically. Whatever this looks like, man, we all have these moments in life, these foundational moments, both positive and negative, that form the baseline or a foundation that we will stand on tomorrow. So what moments are you making count today that will form the foundation that you'll stand on tomorrow? And what I want to talk about today is all of this starts with remembering where we've been. Remembering where we've been. So today we're going to take a look at a story of a guy named Joshua, whose story is found in the Old Testament of the Bible. That's the books of the Bible that were written before Jesus came on the scene. And Gabe talked about Joshua last week when he talked about the friendships that this guy named Moses had. Joshua was the guy that came behind Moses, who Moses invested in. Now, Moses was the guy chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. And God does some incredible things to get the Israelites out of Egypt. He sends plagues to prove to Pharaoh, who was the most powerful ruler in the world at the time. He proved to Pharaoh that the one true God is God and Pharaoh is not. And then God miraculously parts the Red Sea. He leads the Israelites out of slavery and into the desert where God provides food and he provides water and everything that the Israelites needed along the way in the journey. God gives them all these moments to build a foundation on. And then he led Moses and the Israelites up to the edge of this promised land. And God tells Moses, send out 12 spies into the land. And to use a climbing analogy, God goes, hey, go practice the route. Go check it out, scout it out to see what you're going to be walking in when you actually do the real thing. And so these scouts, they go out and they scout the land and they come back and they share, man, the land is exceedingly good. It is unbelievable, but there's just one problem. There's enemies in the way. And they're seemingly impossible. In fact, 10 of the 12 spies come back and they go, we can't do this. Numbers chapter 13, verse 31, they say this, they go, we cannot go up against them. They're stronger than we are. And so they started to spread this bad report about the land among the Israelites. The land we traveled through, they said, and explored will devour. It's pretty extreme there. It will devour anyone who goes to live there. And all the people that we saw were huge. We even saw giants there, like the descendants of Anak, and next to them, we felt like grasshoppers. And that's what they thought as well. And I know we've been there, right? We've all had moments in life where we feel pretty small. And it looks like what we're facing is much bigger than us. And we feel like grasshoppers facing giants in that moment. And we start to ask questions like this: do I have what it takes? God, are you still with me? God, are you still good to me the way that you promised to be? And in these moments, man, we fail to remember who God is and what he's done all along the way. Me too. We're in the same boat. I love the way that a pastor, Steve Carter, he says it. He said, it's easier for us to remember the things we ought to forget and forget the things we ought to remember. It's easier for us to remember the things we ought to forget and forget the things we ought to remember. So what moments are you making count today that will form the foundation you'll stand on tomorrow? Numbers chapter 14 and verse 5, when Moses and Aaron, who were leading the Israelites at the time, they heard this, they fell face down in front of all the Israelites that were there. And Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, they were two of the spies that had gone into the land. When they heard this, they tore their clothes as like a sign of repentance and mourning. And they said to all the Israelites, the land we passed through, it's exceedingly good. It's exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he'll lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey. It's got everything that we need, and God will give it to us. I mean, they're going, remember where we've been and what God's done so far. And then they say to him, only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people in the land, because we will devour them. Their protection's gone. Why? Because the Lord's with us. Remember. And don't be afraid. But the whole assembly, they talked about stoning him, like throwing rocks at him to kill him. Joshua and Caleb, two of the spies, they go, remember who our God is. Remember what he's done. Remember where we've been. Remember the moments that he's given us along the way that now form the foundation that we can stand on. But the Israelites, they failed to remember who God was and what he'd done up to that point. And so what they ended up doing was not taking the land. They ended up wandering the desert for 40 years. 40 years. But because God is faithful to his promises, 40 years go by. And 40 years later, the Israelites find themselves on the edge of the promised land once again. Moses has died, and the military and spiritual leadership has now been passed to one of those two spies that said, hey, we can do it. Joshua is now leading the Israelites. And God is going to give Joshua a moment to build a foundation on that he's going to be able to stand on over the next however many years of his life. So after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, he said, Moses, my servant, is now dead. So you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land that I promised to give you. That land that you didn't take 40 years ago, now's the time. Let's get ready to go. You and all the Israelites, I'll give you every place where you set your foot, just as I promised, just as I told Moses. Remember what I've done before, God is saying. Your territory will extend from the desert of Lebanon to the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, Joshua, so I will be with you, God says. I will never leave you nor forsake you. God's just laying a foundation, a moment that Joshua's going to be able to stand on. And here's what God tells him. Verse 6, I love this. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous, Joshua, because you will lead these people to inherit the land that I swore to their ancestors to give them. So be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law that my servant Moses gave to you, and do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep the book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. God's going, Moses, you have to remember. You have to remember where you've been so you'll know the foundation that you stand on today. And when you do that, you'll be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? What does God say to him again a third time? Be what? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. What do you think God wants Joshua to hang on to here? 3 times in 10 verses, God gives Joshua a moment. Be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous, Joshua. Be strong and very courageous. Why? Because that's what it's going to take for what they're about to do. That's the foundation that they're going to have to remember and stand on for what's going to happen next. It's going to take strength and courage for where God is going to lead them. In fact, this phrase, be strong and courageous, it's going to become a battle cry for the Israelites. As they go in and take the promised land, this moment is going to form a foundation that they're going to look back to and remember, and they're going to need to hang on to. And so Joshua, he ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, it's time. Get your provisions ready. 3 days from now, we'll cross the Jordan, and we're going to go in and we're going to take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you for your own. This desert wandering is done. That 400 years of slavery is done. God's going to do something now that's new. And you're going to have to be strong and courageous. Why? Well, remember the enemies that were on the other side? The giants, and they felt like grasshoppers. Not only are they there, but standing between the Israelites' camp and the promised land where God was going to take them is the Jordan River, which we're going to learn in a few minutes is at flood stage. Here's a picture of the Jordan River at flood stage. It's not just like some lazy river that you go float on a Saturday afternoon. The Jordan River actually starts at the highest point in Israel and descends to the Dead Sea, the lowest point on earth. It's a mountain river. Anybody ever seen like mountain rivers when they're at flood stage and they're just going? Like you don't touch that water. You don't get in that water unless you're crazy and go kayak it or whatever. But this is what's standing between the Israelites and even crossing into the land. And some of us, this feels like what we're up against in life. Throw that picture back up for a minute. This feels like what we're up against in life, doesn't it? We're facing something that's stretching us to our limit. We've got relationships or finances or mental health or physical health battles or spiritually, we just feel like it's a fight to hang on, right? And some days we might even say it feels like I'm in the middle of that river and it feels like I'm drowning right now. See, the Israelites are facing something so powerful and so strong, it feels like there's no way to the other side. You ever felt that? Like, I don't know how I'm going to come out on the other side of this. So what are they going to have to remember? Be strong. Be courageous. And so Joshua said to the priest, take the Ark of the Covenant, which is like this big chest that represents God's presence with his people, and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it up and they went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, today's the day. I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, and they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. So tell the priests, this is crazy, tell the priests who are carrying that ark, that big chest, that are carrying my presence, tell them that when they reach the edge of the water, go stand in it. Go step into that raging river that we saw just a minute ago. And you have to imagine the priests in this moment are like, you want us to do what? Like, Joshua, have you lost your mind? Go stand in that river that's at flood stage? And Joshua's probably like, yeah, that's what I want you to do. Why? Because God told me to. And the priests are like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And Joshua goes, hey, remember? He told us to be strong and courageous. He told us to stand on the foundation of what he's already done. You remember what he did 40 years ago? We were in Egypt, right? And he parted an ocean, a sea. So what's this tiny little river going to do in comparison? What about for you today? What moments are you making count today that form the foundation you'll stand on tomorrow? Because chances are God's going to ask you to do something that may feel like crossing a raging river. He may be working in your life in a way where he's going, you have to trust me. And it's going to be built on the foundation of the moments that have happened before. Verse 14, so when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, they went on ahead of the people. And now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. We've seen the picture of it. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark, representing God's presence, reached the Jordan, and their feet what? Touched the water. They stepped into it. The water didn't part as they walked up to it. They stepped into the water. The water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a great heap a great distance away, at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of the Arabah, that's the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite of Jericho. And the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan, and they stood on dry ground while all of Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. And now they're standing on the land that God had promised to them. The Jordan River is previously impassable. It represented a barrier between the Israelites and what God had promised to them. It miraculously opens up as soon as the priests touch the water. But they had to take that first step, didn't they? They had to step in and trust that God was going to do the impossible in that moment. And what happened was the river dried up and the ground became dry. When we come up against something that's seemingly impossible or impassable in our lives, I just want to ask you, who will go first? Who will remember all that God has done in the past and lean into the moment that will form a new foundation for us to stand on for what he wants to do in the future? Who will remember, be strong, be courageous? I mean, I'm convinced that our world is just waiting for people who carry around the presence of God. That's what these priests had. They were carrying around the presence of God. We all have that now if your faith is in Jesus. The world is waiting for people who carry the presence of God to go first, to step into what seems impossible. Why? So that God can do what only he can do in our lives and in our world. We need it. And when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to go back in and take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, right where the priests are standing, right where they are on dry ground, and carry them out with you and put them at the place where you sleep tonight. And here's why this is important. So Joshua calls together 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe. They go back into the river, and he tells them, take up the stone on your shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites to do what? To serve as a sign among you, to be a foundation. Why? Because in the future, you're going to have to remember this moment. Your children are going to ask you, what do these stones mean? And then you get to tell them the story. You get to tell them everything God did here, that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. And when it crossed the Jordan, the waters were cut off, and these stones are to be a memorial, a foundation, a moment to remember what God did that you're going to get to stand on tomorrow. God's going, don't miss this. Don't move past this. I've moved in power before, and I can move in power again, and I'm doing it right now. This moment, Israel, it's going to form a foundation for you to stand on tomorrow. It's going to be a reminder, be strong, be courageous. Why? Because our God moves in power. And not even the raging Jordan could stop what God wants to do. And so God tells Joshua, build a monument. Why? Because future generations need to know the story. They need to walk by and they need to go, what does this mean? And so all over Israel, you would find these monuments, these stones that were stacked up or built up as reminders for what God did in people's lives. And each of these 12 stones that God tells the Israelites to take, they represent a story, a moment that'll form the foundation for the next generation to stand on. It was meant to trigger a question. I mean, think about it. When kids are walking along with their parents, what do? Have you ever rode in the car with a kid for like more than 5 minutes? They ask questions, right? They're like, what's that? What's this? Look at this. And they just keep going on. It's meant to trigger questions. What happened here? Tell me the story. And then the parents would tell them the story of this foundation. They would build a foundation of moments from the past that God had provided that the next generation would then stand on. And so they would go, this stone, it represents the God who formed us and made us. We were made by him. We were designed by him and we were made for him. And then this God, he actually brought our people out of Egypt. We were slaves and he provided a miraculous way to bring us out. And then that God, when we wandered in the desert, we didn't have an identity. We weren't a people, but God told us who we were, that we were his chosen people. And then he gave us his law to show us how to love him and love each other. And then he gave us a purpose. He told us that we're now a kingdom of priests. What that means is we're bridge builders. We're meant to connect people back to God. And then he provided for us in the desert. We didn't want for anything while they're there, these parents would tell their kids. They would say, God provided food, he provided water, our clothes didn't wear out in 40 years of wandering. I mean, think about it. And then even though we were disobedient, God was faithful. He led us back to the edge of this promised land, even when we blew it, even when we messed it up along the way. And he promised us that he was going to provide a way back into the promised land. And then he gave us a battle cry. He told Joshua, be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. And it started to form a foundation that we could stand on because we trust our God. And then there was this moment where God stopped the flow of the Jordan River. You see it, it's a flood stage right now. But on that day, the priest stepped in first and it stopped flowing. And then God, he actually brought us into the promised land on dry ground. And he led us to defeating all of our enemies who stood in our way along the way. And then he gave us this gift, this marker, this memorial to remember all he's done. And I think the parents would look at their kids and go, that's why I'm telling you this story today. What happened here? Well, look what God did. Each of these stones represent moments that God provided for Israel that would start to form the foundation of faith that they could walk in the next day, and they could give it to the next generation and the next generation. So let me ask you again, Hope City, what moments are you making count today that will form the foundation that you'll stand on tomorrow? So back when we were hiking in Colorado, when we lived there, I love going out hiking in the mountains. I love climbing these mountains that are called 14ers, like mountains over 14,000 feet. I'm kind of crazy that way. And along the trails, you would find these stacks of stones like this. They're actually called cairns. And not Karens who get in the way, but Karens who, no, I'm sorry, there's two Karens in the room. I love you. You guys don't get in the way. But cairns, C-A-I-R-N-S. Go and throw up that picture of that, Ash. These guide the way. These cairns, they mark the trail. They show the path that someone has walked before, and they form the foundation on which others will stand. And the trickier that the path gets, the more important these become, because as you go higher and higher, you don't have like a marked out trail anymore. It just becomes like boulder fields that you're like transversing, or you're along a ledge or up a rock face. Here's some pictures from when some buddies and I went and hiked a couple 14ers one day. You're literally just walking through a rock field trying to find your way. And the only thing guiding it is these stack of rocks. So you're coming up to a ledge and you're like, which way do I go here? Do I go left? Do I go right? Throw up that next picture, Ash. And these rock stacks show you this is the direction that I'm supposed to go. If you rely on these moments that have happened before, then you can make sure that you don't step off into loose rocks and fall down the mountainside or slip and fall off a ledge. You rely on the moments that someone else has provided by going before you. And they now form a firm foundation for your feet to stand on right now. And in the same way, God is telling Joshua and the Israelites, all these moments, all these things along the way are now forming a foundation, not just for you to stand on, but for the next generation who's going to follow after you. And when anyone asks, what is this? Tell them the story. Tell them what happened here. These moments are to represent what God has done in your life, and they form the foundation that we now stand on. It's pretty cool, isn't it? I mean, our problem, though, today, if you're anything like me, is we let these smaller moments, our failures or our anxiety, we let these small everyday things form the foundation that we stand on tomorrow, instead of allowing God to form the base and remember all he's done. We start building our foundation with things like this, like my job. Man, I gotta figure out how to make a living, and man, finances are stacking up, and so I gotta provide for my family. So I don't know how the money's gonna work out, or I don't know where we're gonna live. We're working on our house, and see what happens. The whole thing starts to fall apart. So I'm putting this here, and all these small things, and you know what? I just gotta work harder to make it all work. Anybody ever said that? I say that all the time. I gotta work harder to make it all work, and then slowly I start to find my purpose in my work, in what I do. Right? And then I'm starting to work for my identity rather than receive it from God along the way. I find my purpose because of the hard work I can do. And then I start to work for my identity. My identity becomes my job. It becomes what I do, not what God has already said about me, but it's what I earn. And then you throw relationships in the mix, right? Like I get married, and I'm trying to balance everything out. Or, I have kids, and kids, their sports schedules, it gets crazy, right? And it starts to get harder and harder to balance. I think that'll stand. That's kind of life, right? Does that feel like anybody's life so far? And then I need to make space for me. I need hobbies. Like, I need something to do. And the response to this is like, I got to get some time away, but at the same time, I got to work harder like I suck, and I'm just trying to make up ground. And then we go, oh yeah, Jesus. You know what Jesus said about himself? I'm the cornerstone. I'm the biggest rock in the whole thing. I'm supposed to form the foundation. And guess what happens when the cornerstone is like just an add-on and it's placed on top? It's going to happen. The whole thing collapses, right? I let it down gently there. And then people walk by and they're like, what happened here? Well, that's Dad's job that he put ahead of everything else. That's Mom's unrealistic expectations for herself and everyone around her. That was your grandpa's addiction. Just a pile of rubble now. It's the divorce. It's the kids who don't have a foundation of faith to stand on, which is a real problem in our world today, right? It's the mental health collapse. I mean, fill in the blanks. What happened here? What moments are you making count today? What moments are you building on today that'll form the foundation that you'll stand on tomorrow? So here's the good news. Even when our lives are a mess, even when it feels like a balancing act and everything's collapsing, Jesus, all he's asking us to do is remember. To remember the foundation that he can provide. Remember who he is and what he's done. As we remember, he reminds us to actually take this mess of our lives and stack it back this way. He goes, I'm the cornerstone. I form the foundation. Place your faith in me. Base everything else in your life on this. And some of us, you'll have an opportunity to do that here in a few weeks through our baptism weekend, to say, I'm all in. Jesus, I want the foundation you can provide. And guess what? I don't have to earn my identity anymore, because when I'm in Christ, he tells me who I am. I'm holy. I'm chosen. I'm loved. I'm blessed. I'm adopted. God says that I'm his child. And out of that identity, I now have a purpose. Yeah, I get to know that I'm here to use every ounce of my giftings and my passions and my talents, and I've got a story to tell. I've got a story to tell of all that God has done in my life, and what he's doing through me right now is going to form a foundation that I get to tell to the next generation, and they can stand on the same thing. And then I'm going to start working out my relationships, like my marriage, right? Like, take marriage for an example. In marriage, because my foundation is on Jesus, I don't have to earn my identity or my standing in that relationship anymore. I can learn to give up myself the way that Jesus gave himself up for the church. Or I can learn to actually surrender my life to him in the way that Jesus has called me to surrender to him. Or how about this? How about kids? I get to, instead of like just cart them around everywhere and take them to all their things, I get to come alongside them. And in everything that we do, I get to tell them the story of all that God's doing in our lives, so that when they go, hey, what is this? What's going on in our lives? Why do we live this way? Why do we do this together? Mom, Dad, tell me the story of what's happened. I get to point back down to this. And then other people come in the mix, and sometimes it gets messy, right? I get to let Jesus form the foundation for how I love them, how I forgive them, how I care for those in need along the way. I get to live my life in a way that people around me ask, what happened here? What is this? And all I can do is point back to Jesus. And then the church comes in, right? And this community that God has provided for us to live this life of faith out together, it starts to stack up in this as well. And people around us, they start to go, man, what is this? Like, your life is just so bizarre. And the people you're hanging out with, like, I've never met people like you. I've never met people who are so loving and kind and caring and accepting and full of grace. Yet you point me back to truth. What is this? And you get to go, man, there's this crazy group of people called Hope City that God has provided in my life, and it's starting to change things. You want to come and see? You want to come and see what this is all about? That was my wife in the back. I paid her for that moment. And then all these smaller rock things, they start to fall in place too. You go, Jesus, like, my job, it's what you've given me to pay the bills. I don't have to stress over it anymore because you're going to give me all that I need. And I don't have to find my identity in my work because my identity is way down here. I may get a paycheck from something that's different than my identity or my purpose. I'm just going to trust you, Jesus, to protect and provide. And then how about finances? When we start to live this way, finances become a pretty little rock thing, don't they? And we get to go, Jesus, you're gonna give me everything. And how about friendships? Jesus goes, I want you to live this life in community with other people. I want you to live out this story of good news of what I'm doing in your life in a way that others look and they go, what is this? Why do you do this? And then I get to have fun with my life, right? I get to have some hobbies and some things that actually give me joy in life, but that's a little rock thing. It doesn't form the foundation. It's part of what I get to do. And then how about this? How about rest? Could anybody use rest? And Jesus goes, you know what? When you learn to live this way, you get to live freely and lightly. I love the way that the Message paraphrase puts one of Jesus' words. It says that you get to live in the unforced rhythms of grace, and it all starts to stand up when the foundation is stacked in the right order. What moments are you making count today that'll form the foundation that you'll stand on tomorrow? When you learn to live this way, when we're built on these kinds of moments, starting with what God has done in our lives, just like Joshua and the Israelites, guess what people are going to start to ask? Because when you live this way, it's weird. Nobody lives this way. People are going to start going, what happened here? I knew how you used to live. I knew how you used to stress over money. I know how you used to go about your job. What happened here? And you get to go, Jesus, he's rebuilding my life. He's changing me. He's giving me a new way to process it. I don't have it all together yet, but man, let me tell you the story. And your life is going to become a beacon of good news, a marker of hope on the path. And when you're pushed to your limit, you'll know which way to go because you know what foundation you're standing on. What moments do you need to remember today that'll form a foundation that you're going to stand on tomorrow? 2021, 2 years ago, man, it was the hardest year of my life. We had just moved here from a community that we loved to plant Hope City. And we were following Jesus and what he said that he wanted for our lives. And we were trying to be as obedient as we were able in that. As we were working on planting a church, man, you guys know this community, like either everybody's already going to church or they're not going to church and they never want to go to church, right? And so it was just taking a lot of time to build relationships and find people who are interested in like starting something new. On top of that, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Who trusts somebody they don't know in the middle of that, right? And so it just was taking time and work. And I wasn't trusting Jesus. I was like, I need to do more. I need to work harder because apparently there's something wrong with me. God, there's not something wrong with you. I know that. There must be something wrong with me, so do more. And in the middle of that, I was diagnosed with anxiety. I wasn't sleeping. Like I'm telling you, for over a year, I probably got 2 or 3 hours of sleep at night, a max. I don't even know how I'm standing here today. And I just worked harder. And it wasn't producing the results that I was used to seeing when I put in hard work. I remember a time in the car driving home. It was about this time 2 years ago, and we had just been at a soccer game with my kids, and they're talking and like trying to have fun with me. You know what's happening in my brain? I'm not hearing a word they're saying. My brain's running 1,000,000 miles a minute trying to figure out what to do, how to make this work. God, how do I make this all stack up? Like I'm just doing what you told me to do, so where are you in the middle of this? And then I remember praying, I remember exactly where I was. It was the corner of Lakeside and Thompson in Springdale. And I pulled up to a stoplight and I was like, God, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. If you could find somebody else to start this church or if you just let me quit, that's what I want to do. I'm done. I'm out. And I remember, really distinctly, the moment God gave me next. I've never heard God speak to me audibly, but it was one of those times, you know what I'm saying, where you just felt it impressed on you so strongly. I felt it impressed on me so strongly that I was like, that can only be God. And he's like, Adam, what story do you want to tell? What story do you want to tell? Do you want to tell the story of you working as hard as you could, and by your own efforts, you burned out and you quit because you tried to do it on your own? You weren't even doing it the way I told you to. What, you want to tell the story of this rubble and pile of rocks that, man, Dad tried really hard to start this church, and he tried to do all this stuff for God. He couldn't do it, so he quit and ran away. Is that the story you want to tell? Or do you want to tell a story that we're going to restack this thing, and you're going to learn to trust me, and you're going to learn to trust that I build the church, and you're going to be faithful along the way, that you're going to meet people, and you're going to invite them in, and there actually are people in Northwest Arkansas looking for a church like Hope City. You're going to trust the foundation only Jesus can provide, and he's going to build a church. Which way you want to do it? What story do you want to tell? And that started to form a moment, a foundation for the next year. So fast forward a year later, I got on some really good anxiety meds. It's awesome. I'm just telling you. But typically, God speaks to me in three places. It's when I'm in the car, it's when I'm in the shower, or it's when I'm in the bathroom. All right, one of those three things, because it's actually quiet and I can actually hear from him. I won't tell you which one of these three places I was in this story, but I remember God saying to me again, hey, you ready now? Are you ready now? Because everything you've been through is for this time and for this purpose. The story you're going to now tell is all that I've done in you and all that I've done through you. I've built a church. You just get to go tell people about it. I've built your life up to this moment. You just get to go talk about it. Everything in your life has been preparing you for this moment. So people would look at it and they go, what happened here? And I get to go, God built a church. Jesus showed me how to trust him again. He showed me all the ways that he's been faithful back then. And guess what? He's going to be faithful again. He's going to be faithful tomorrow. So what about you? What moments do you need to remember today so that it'll form a foundation you can stand on tomorrow? If you're like me, sometimes these moments, they can be hard to see, right? Or they can be hard to come up with or remember. And sometimes I need something bigger than myself to remind me of the foundation that I stand on. Sometimes I just need to remember who God is. And so I want to close by doing this. I want to look at some of the names that God calls himself. Some of these things came out of the Old Testament that describe who he is as character. And they came out of stories like Joshua's and stories like Moses. And these are all over the Old Testament, and they formed a foundation, markers along the way of what happened here. No, this is who our God is. Check this out, and you might get your phone out. It's how we take notes around here. But our God is El Shaddai. He's Lord God Almighty. That forms a base, right? That's a foundation we're standing on. He's El Elyon. He's God Most High. He's strength. He's supremacy. He reigns over all. He's Adonai. He's our Lord. He's our Master. He's Jehovah Nissi. The Lord my banner. It means that God gives me my identity and he gives me my standing. He's my defender. He's Jehovah Ra. It means the Lord is my shepherd and in him I lack nothing. He's Jehovah Rapha. He's the God who heals. He's Jehovah Shammah, the Lord who is there. He's Jehovah Sidkenu, the Lord our righteousness. I don't have to work to earn my righteousness. All I got to do is place my faith in him. He's El Olam, the everlasting God. And maybe you've heard this one before. He's Jehovah Jireh. The Lord will provide. He's Jehovah Shalom. The Lord is peace. He's Jehovah Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts, which means this. God reigns over every army in heaven and on earth, every nation. He's over it all. He's holding it all together. And he's Yahweh. So I am. I cause to be. And so as we close out today, I know that if you're like me, some of us, we need to have a moment, don't we? We need to have a moment to remember who God is and what he's done. And this moment will actually form a foundation for you that you can stand on tomorrow. So we're going to have a station set up right here with a bunch of rocks like this. And it's going to be an opportunity for you to come take this rock. There's a Sharpie, and you can write down a moment. Maybe for some of us, it's a date, right? It's when you trusted Jesus for the first time. It's when you got sober. You know, maybe others of us, it's a moment where you remember, I wrote down, what story do you want to tell? Maybe you don't have that word for you yet. Maybe you just need to write down one of those things about God, one of those names of God. So it forms a foundation for you to stand on tomorrow. And when friends at work walk by your desk, or your kids walk in your office, or they look at your nightstand and that rock is sitting there, what are they going to ask? What is this? What happened here? And you get to tell them the story. It's the day that I got sober. It's the day that I trusted Jesus. It's Jehovah Jireh. God will provide no matter what happens. He's the same God now as he always has been, and he'll do it again. And so we're going to go into our time of prayer that we do every week. And there's going to be a basket with rocks on this table. So you can make your way down front. You can grab a rock and write down that moment. What do you need to remember? What's going to form the foundation today that you'll have for tomorrow? Write that down, and then there's going to be communion stations on the same table. You can grab that. There's this little piece of bread and this cup of juice that reminds us the foundation that Jesus provides, that his body was broken, his blood was poured out, and in him, he's given us a moment, a foundation worth standing on that we can build our lives on. Let's pray. So God, thanks for this morning. Thank you for all these moments you give us along the way to remind us who you are and what you're about and how you work in our lives, and that you're the same God right now that you were back then when we read stories about Joshua. That you're the God who works in our direction, and you still tell us be strong and courageous, because what we're facing, God, may be too big. It's bigger than us. And it may feel like a raging river, but God, you just say, trust me, take a step. And you've given us a foundation of things that we can look back on and moments that you've showed up before, and we can trust that you'll show up again. So God, I pray that you would make that moment clear for every person in this room, that you give them a word or a phrase or even a name for you that they could write on a rock, that they could take it with them, and that, God, it would be something that they could remember. We love you. Jesus, thanks for all that you've done for us. It's in your name we pray. Amen.